One of the interesting things that I've tried to communicate to Americans that have come across about Australian culture is something that I call the she'll be right mate spirit. You know what I'm talking about. Us Aussies like to think she'll be right mate. We are overly optimistic. We don't usually get too concerned unless things go really belly up. And then even when it does, we're pretty convinced it'll probably turn out all right in the end. Well, Aussies are famous for the word selfie, and unfortunately I think this she'll be right mate attitude has infiltrated the web and gone global, and as a result this sort of carefree spirit means that we see social media fails almost every single week. Whether or not it was the BBC journalist who accidentally tweeted that the Queen of England was dead. She unfortunately had just witnessed a dress rehearsal of what might happen if there were a royal death. And it happened to be the day that the Queen was actually in hospital for her annual physical. Or LG. I don't know if you remember the Bendgate saga when people were upset that Apple iPhones were apparently bending. Well, LG decided, or at least their marketing team decided they would get on the bandwagon and tweet that LG smartphones were better than iPhones because they didn't bend, except they sent that tweet from an iPhone. Or the online beauty magazine who commented on Twitter about Oprah Winfrey's fashion during the Oscars and posted a photo with their commentary, except it wasn't Oprah Winfrey, it was Whoopi Goldberg. Oops. The reality is we're not very good at using social media well. And so businesses, organizations, Christian ministries, churches, they've begun to develop social media policies, guidelines to help them navigate these new waters. And these are some serious waters. I'm sure you've all heard of Adele, right? What you might not know is that Adele doesn't actually send any of her own tweets anymore. She doesn't drink anymore, but she used to, and she almost put her foot in it a few times with drunk tweets. So her management team saved her from herself, and now her tweets go through at least 2 people before they see the internet. Quite wise, if you ask me. I also read that last year Brian Houston from Hillsong got himself into some hot water after he took to Twitter to air some of his grievances with a Channel 9 reporter. You see, there is a uniquely dangerous aspect to social media, and that is when we make a mistake or when we sin, we do it in front of a global audience. But what makes our poor behavior online even worse is that when you actually think about it, it's far easier to misspeak in person than it is online. It actually takes effort and it takes intentionality for you to post an ungracious or uncharitable comment on Facebook or on someone's blog. I remember I was working in an office building and our team was expanding. We were hiring some new people, and as a result, one of the new guys that we were hiring was going to take one of my friend's offices, and he was going to be relocated to a cubicle. And so my friend asked me, he said, look, when the new guy starts, can you please not tell him that it used to be his office? He didn't want there to be awkwardness between them. He didn't want the guy to feel bad. And so anyway, we fast forward, it's this new guy's first day, and I walk down the hall, and this guy's in his office and the door is open, and I stop and I introduce myself and say hello, and I noticed that it was quite dark in his office. And so I asked him about it, why it was so dark, and he mentioned something about not having unpacked his lamp yet, but he also said that the sun was too bright and he liked to have the shades closed. And what were the very next words out of my mouth? I said, oh yeah, when my friend here at this cubicle used to have this office, he too liked to have the shades closed. And as I was speaking, my mind was telling me, redirect, Nathan. Change course, Nathan. Don't say it. But it was too late. The words came out. My friend could hear the whole conversation while he's sitting there at his cubicle. So one benefit we have when we're communicating online is when we actually finish a sentence, we have the opportunity to decide whether or not we actually want to say it. But in person, as my example demonstrates, we're talking and our gums are flapping and there is no chance to delete any of the words before hitting send. But that means that we should actually expect that our communication online should be far more godly than it is in person. But in fact, what we find is often the exact opposite. You see, the real danger with social media isn't that it's now easier to communicate. It's that it takes far less courage. The internet has enabled certain individuals to exercise a sinful courage, a boldness, when really what they need is God-given humility. And adding fuel to the fire, ungodly tweets beget further ungodly tweets. Ungodly comments beget further ungodly comments. And perhaps, I suggest, James might say that our tweets are set on fire by hell. Some of you here might recognize this name, Lindsay Stone. She made headlines a number of years ago because of a photo that she took at Arlington Cemetery, which is a military cemetery in the US. And she took a photo that was offensive, and she posted it to Facebook. And in Lindsay's defense, when she posted this to Facebook, it was intended to be a joke between friends, a very juvenile joke, but a joke just between some friends. But the picture didn't stay on Facebook, and it went out on the World Wide Web. And once this picture that Lindsay had taken was out, there was public outrage. And so in not too long, a Facebook page was started that was titled, "Fire Lindsay Stone." People were calling for this young lady to lose her job. That then quickly escalated to a page titled, "Set Fire to Lindsay Stone." And the internet en masse was now issuing death threats. People posted her phone number on these Facebook pages and then her address. People were encouraging men to sexually assault her. And as you can imagine, this destroyed her life. But this newfound sinful boldness, it's not just online, it has even redefined what we used to call just simply schoolyard bullying. We now call it cyberbullying. It's something that 1 in 5 Aussie kids claim they've experienced, and if you go across the pond to the US, more than 50% of US students claim to have experienced cyberbullying. But it's not just in our schools, it's not just out there in the world, it's in our churches, even in Reformed churches. Our words online, your words online, often lack the grace that you claim to believe in. We offer a judgment of charity when it comes to church membership. We accept or believe someone's profession of faith. But online, on the internet, we don't offer a judgment of charity. We usually assume the worst and then we attack. As sinful people, we are skilled at distorting God's good gifts, including the good gift of technology and social media. But this distortion, it goes in two ways. There are those that do abuse it by communicating and behaving poorly or badly online. But there is another group who, in response to those who are using social media well, who are actually doing what I'm trying to encourage you to do tonight, who are fostering good and godly relationships online, in response to that, though, they begin to elevate pixels over people. And I've said it many times before, pixels are people. Yes, real, meaningful, and deep relationships can be born and can even flourish online. But you and I were designed for community in the midst of flesh and blood. Have you considered what a strange world we live in today? We live in a world where we can connect with almost anybody out there in the world via social media, yet many of us have never felt more disconnected. 3 million Aussies are living right now with depression or anxiety. We no longer write checks or donate food or clothes when tragedy strikes. Instead, we update our Facebook profile picture and think we've done our bit. As Christians, not only do we need to be mindful of our speech online, we need to work hard to foster and promote real-world community and connection. The Apostle John in 2 John wrote this. He says, "Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face," a foreign concept, "so that our joy may be complete." If face-to-face contact no longer holds the top rank, the top priority in your view of communications and community and fellowship, then your thinking has become distorted. So it pains me to see so many Christians today advocating for online church. And I get so much pushback when I say this, but at best, online church is inferior. And at worst, it's an oxymoron. As you know, I live with my family over 15,000 kilometers away in the States. Pixels on a screen, they help us keep a connection with our family. FaceTime sustains relationships with grandparents, with grandkids, aunts and uncles and cousins. And these relationships, they're real, but nothing can replace in-person contact. I'm sure you can imagine. Last week at Tullamarine, after we landed, the joy, the hugs, the kisses, when our family could meet other family and embrace instead of simply holding an iPad. My son, he's only 2. He's the American in the family. This trip has been his first visit to Australia, and it was his first time meeting his cousins. And after their car pulled up out the front of the house where we were staying, my son ran across the front lawn, screaming, yelling out the names of his cousins, wanting a hug. Thanks to FaceTime, he knew his cousins, but that moment on the front lawn in Shepparton was better than pixels on a screen. We should be thankful for the many Great Commission opportunities that digital outreach can bring. It is a blessing that we can connect with Christians all around the world with the click of a button, but the internet, is not the means by which God designed His people to flourish. The very egalitarian and consumer-minded and on-demand nature of social media and the web runs in direct opposition to the design of the church. The internet can never replace the God-ordained and the God-blessed messiness and beauty of life lived in the context of a local church, where your pastor actually knows your name. So as we seek to use social media well, as we seek to bridle our tongues, seek to extinguish our tweets of fire, and to pursue godliness online, it is not in an effort to create some kind of digital utopian Christian experience in the World Wide Web. It is simply because God calls His people to holiness wherever their speech or their actions take place. And your speech is powerful online. Pixels are people. Your words are read by flesh and blood. And the screen upon which those words are read, they don't shield people from your words. If anything, they magnify or amplify their power. And sadly, often their pain. Social media really should come with a warning label. Handle with care. So how do we handle it with care? How do we be proactive and not take this she'll be right mate attitude, so that we can avoid some of these dangers and take advantage of some of the unprecedented gospel opportunities that these tools provide us. Well, like BBC journalists, like Adele, like anyone who's in the eye of the media, we too need a social media policy. And as I said earlier, churches, Christian organizations are already forming some of these guidelines, or at least formalizing them. But I want to encourage you that this isn't a search for something new. We mustn't forget this truth. The Christian already has a social media policy. It's called the Bible. Our problem isn't that we don't have guidelines. Our problem is our sinful hearts and our forgetfulness. We're chartering new waters, and we have left our Bibles on the shore. So in the time remaining this evening, if we were to skim through our social media policy, the Bible, I want to think through what might some of those section headings be in this social media policy. And I want to propose some of those tonight. Perhaps one would be quick to read and slow to comment. We know that James tells us to be quick to hear and slow to speak, but what does that look like online? Well, firstly, it means reading articles. That's how you hear online, before posting a comment or firing off a tweet. Taking the time to read someone else's words online is a way in which you can love your neighbor. And if you don't, and you just see a headline and fire off a Facebook comment, then you are elevating your words above theirs. Maybe another section heading would be simply sleep on it. Proverbs 15:28 says this: "The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things." Social media, blogging, e-books, the rise of self-publishing, they've opened the door to a world without editors and without wise counsel. Christians don't ponder anymore, but it's godly to ponder. Today, if we have an opinion, we just publish it, and millions of blog posts are published every day. In our instant messaging age, sometimes it's best to sleep on it. Another headline might be, "Beware the Facebook group and comment threads." Those that are laughing know what I'm talking about. Proverbs 10:19 says, "When words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent." I'm sure some of you may have seen the famous cartoon. You have a man sitting at his computer, and his wife calls out to him from the bedroom, and she asks, "Are you coming to bed?" And the man replies, "I can't, this is important." And she asks, "What?" And his response, "Someone is wrong on the internet." With the stream of consciousness nature of social media, with everyone essentially just pouring out their opinions, there are plenty of people online with whom we can disagree with. And if we've run out of religious debate, there's enough political turmoil both here in Australia and overseas to find someone you can disagree with. But oftentimes, even when initiated with good and godly intentions, simply through the sheer abundance of our words on Facebook, in blog comments, we quickly fall into displaying a lack of prudence, of love, and godliness. Another section headline might be known for love. Be known for love. In John 13:35, Jesus reminded his disciples that the whole world would know that they're his followers because of their love for one another. If we were to scroll through your social media history, what would we find? Would we discover that the overwhelming majority of your social media updates demonstrate a love for your fellow brothers and sisters? Do they suggest that you're living a life that's following a different course from most people in the world? Or are you quick to correct and to tear down? Are you offering a judgment of charity? Or do you always assume the worst? When you speak the truth online, is it motivated by love? Or is it fueled by an ungodly boldness afforded to you by new technology? Another heading might be, post wisely, redeeming the time. Paul in Ephesians exhorts us to look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. We can spend an inordinate amount of time in the foolish. Now, this has always been the case. This is not as a result of social media. It's always been the case. But social media is now documenting a history of your imaginations. It's showcasing what you're thinking on and what consumes your time. Cat videos have never been so easy to record or watch. But our time here on earth is short. Does your social media usage demonstrate a whole life lived for Christ? One which is redeeming the time. One that is lived with counter-cultural priorities like godliness, family, and the church. And one final example of a heading that we might find in this social media policy. Perhaps we would read, death and life are in the power of a tweet. Proverbs 18:21 warns that death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. We must never forget that everything that we tweet is recorded. Future employers, those reviewing your uni application, they're going to be checking your social media profiles. Young men, future father-in-laws are going to be looking at your Facebook accounts and your Instagram. What would you say if, even more terrifying than a future father-in-law, but Jesus were to ask you to give an account for every idle word you've posted online? Now, I don't want to set up sort of false expectations tonight. We are never going to tame our tongues this side of glory. We're never going to extinguish all of our tweets of fire. And the temptation to distort God's good gifts is going to remain until the Lord returns. But just as the Lord has provided us with new and unique gospel opportunities through today's technology, He has provided us with a way to navigate this new and treacherous course. Our call in this day and age is to consult the God-given social media policy, the Scriptures, and to strive by the enabling of the Holy Spirit to pursue holiness and to pursue God's glory in all of our tweets, in all of our posts, and in all of our comments. You and I have unprecedented opportunities living in 2016. And because of that, we also have a great responsibility to make use of them. May we not neglect that opportunity.